I thought the title of today's session was particularly compelling, effective energy policy. Well, I guess the question is, do we have one? And if it's learning lessons from 40 years of trying, what has worked and what hasn't worked. So I thought where I would begin is first, if you're going to have an effective energy policy, you have to understand the landscape. What does the landscape look like? And then from that, we're going to design a strategy. And then from that, we're going to decide which of our tools in our toolbox are the most effective to meet that strategy. And I think that's sort of the metrics of whether we've been successful or not. So let's take a step back and look. We don't live in an energy island here in the United States, and we live in a global energy market. What does it look like going out for the next 20 years or so? We've got a pretty inconvenient energy truth, which is there's going to be 50% growth in energy demand around the world. What's different now than it had been when we were looking at it 10, 20 years ago is that most of that demand, if not 90% of that demand, is coming from the developing world. China and India together comprise the majority of that, but we can't forget that the Middle East is the second fastest growing region for energy demand. And that's an important part that we need to consider today when we look at the global energy resource base. As we're coming off of Arab Spring, we're in Arab winter, we're going to go back into Arab Spring again, the rulers in the Middle East are increasingly looking to satisfy the demands of their citizens first. And that means more of the resources in the Middle East will be going to the Middle East. And then as good business people, rulers in the Middle East with resources are looking to their next customer. And that is not us. They're looking to Asia, and you're seeing the whole global oil market really transition to satisfying the energy demands of the Middle East and then growing to their next customer, which is Asia. And we have to ask ourselves, the United States, what are we doing to inoculate ourselves from the shifts that will take time to manifest itself, but we're seeing them today. Let's look at how much oil we are going to need. And why am I talking about oil? Because our transportation sector here in the United States is still 94% dependent on oil. And to meet the demand growth that I just referenced, we're going to need to find a lot of oil over the next 20 or 30 years. That middle part of the slide is the amount of oil we're going to need to find in that period of time. The blue part of this slide are all the existing oil fields as we know them. And it looks like a ski slope because a lot of the big oil fields that we've depended upon for so long are in grave decline. So we're trying to replace those fields that are in decline and meet the new demands from new economies and growing populations. So we have to meet and produce about 6 times the capacity of Saudi Arabia in a short amount of time. Some of that's going to come obviously from the Middle East, but we need to ask ourselves, what are we doing here at home within the North American continent to be part of that transformation and so that we can ensure we've got those supplies here at home. Let's get a little dose of reality of what's happening here. I mean, as stamped a couple years ago, and this is December 2008, 2009, 2010, and then last week, the price of gasoline in this country is continuing to go up. I don't think any of us in this room, no matter where you sit on the ideological spectrum, are going to forecast that we're going to turn this around and go back down to $1.71 anytime soon. Now, we need to be thinking about this in terms of our economy, and what we've got 8.5% unemployment. CBO came out yesterday and said that's going to go up to close to 9%. At the end of this year, we have to look at where we are in debt and deficits. And then if you look at the backdrop of global energy demand, our employment picture, our economic picture, our deficit, what are we going to do in terms of our toolbox? What do we have in our toolbox that will make us more energy secure? We'll begin to address the unemployment problem, and we'll add revenue because we are a hemorrhaging economy in terms of trying to meet our entitlements and our spending that we need to do. So what is our energy policy in the U.S.? It has not changed. Our energy policy has been the same since President Reagan. We want to reduce our dependence. In this case, it's Middle East oil from this cartoon. And when President Nixon announced this policy, we were 30% dependent on imported oil, and we were 70% dependent on ourselves. Last year we were about 60-40. Right now, because of the recession and because of some production on private lands, we're about 50%. That should not give anybody a great deal of comfort because we've come down from 60 to 50. It means that we're not using the resources in the toolbox very effectively. And that is pause for looking at our strategy. So let's look at the results of our strategy. Well, this goes back to 1980, and this goes out to 2035. This is EIA's latest forecast that came out several weeks ago. We don't look any different, to your point. We're a little bit different in terms of our fossil fuels consumption. It's gone down slightly, but not dramatically. We're still more or less a little bit over 80% dependent on fossil fuels 20 years from now. Natural gas is a growing part of our mix, but everything grows. So everybody's chairs are still at the table. Everybody's chairs has gotten bigger, and some people's chairs have gotten slightly bigger or slightly smaller. But according to what Dan Jurgen says in his book, is that this takes a long time to turn around. If there was magic fairy dust, that we could use, we would have already used it. And so there isn't. We have to be cognizant of our energy reality and manage the reality. I know there are some that wish we had a different, deck and a different hand that was dealt to us. We don't. So let's deal with this rather than a made-up energy reality and made-up promises that we can change this in a very short period of time. We have to manage to our reality because other countries are. China is, India is, Middle East is. You read articles about Latin America becoming a bastion of stability. Who knew that would have happened? With Brazil managing its resources very effectively, Africa increasingly being able to use its resources effectively. And what the heck are we doing? Are we doing that? And we are blessed with resources from everything from oil to gas to coal to nuclear to renewables. But what are we doing about it? Well, let's talk about some of the tools in the toolbox. We have a lot of resources off of our shores. And up until recently, we thought we were going to get more access to them. The 5-year plan that the Bush administration left behind and the new plan that the Obama administration put forward indicated that we were going to get smart and use more of our resources. We now have a pretty final 5-year plan from the Obama administration that governs 2012 to 2017 that shuts down a lot of areas. The entire Atlantic coast, the entire Pacific coast, areas in the Gulf, and new areas in Alaska are now off limits for exploration. That doesn't sound like a very smart energy policy, knowing what we know about the global oil market. Next slide. We are awash in natural gas. But the interesting thing is so is the rest of the world. Are we going to be the ones here that are going to use those resources effectively here, the shale gills we call it? Are we going to be the ones that continue to advance the technology so that other countries can access these resources and so that we have a much more diversified and less pressurized energy market? Or are we going to do something stupid, as we say in Texas, shoot ourselves in the foot, reload and shoot again, and begin to shut down this energy supply that could really transform our energy supply picture and, importantly, our competitiveness picture? We are increasingly in a very economic competitive world. I mean, I represent the business sector. And you look at what our manufacturers are facing as they are compared to manufacturers in Asia, in Latin America. It's a really cutthroat world out there. We've got an opportunity here to change that for our economy. Are we going to use it? Or are we going to tell people, you know what? Rather than going to Nebraska, you should go to Nigeria. Rather than going to the Marcellus, we'd rather you go to Mozambique. And we're saying that to a lot of people. We're saying that to a lot of industry, which is it's going to get too difficult, too expensive, too time-consuming. Operate here. Go somewhere else. And people are voting with their capital. And that's a bad news story for our energy security and for our economy. If we want to do something else, we would build Keystone. And I know that Luciana's going to talk about this, so I'm not going to take any time. But there's something we could do right now. Energy security, check. Jobs, check. Revenue, check. No-brainer, check. But somehow we've let this get caught up in politics. So I won't go more into that. But there's an opportunity right now to change our supply picture. And then we have to have a come-to-Jesus discussion about coal. We're sitting on, some estimates say 250. Some others with technology say 450 years worth of coal. But what's happening right now? With EPA regulations, et cetera, we are shutting down the opportunity to build new coal-fired power plants because they don't know what the regulatory landscape looks like. But coal production is not going down. Why not? In fact, it's up 70% year on from 2009 to 2010. We're exporting our coal. That sounds like a great energy policy. We've got an abundant, affordable resource here that if we had more and more technology we could use here for affordable energy to fuel our competitive economy. But no, instead we're going to ship it to India, we're going to ship it to China, we're going to ship it to other countries that do not have the same environmental standards that we do. So are we doing anything for environmental benefit? Absolutely not. Are we doing anything to help other countries become more competitive? Yes. So we're actually, if you are in the environmental community, we're doing things wrong twice over. And we've really got to take stock of that. And going back to your point, Bill, it goes back to technology, technology, technology. Have we used our R&D dollars right? We've done nothing to actually change that picture for ourselves and make those circles. We should be developing the technology here and selling the technology, not selling the coal.